Is it just me? It's like getting kind of hot. It must be just me. Well, it's because I'm very excited to share God's word today. And I'm also excited to have Esther back. Now it's my time to take a break. No, I'm kidding. So today I'm very excited because I was really challenged by my time of prep for what I'm about to share today. So I want you to just get your hearts ready because there was some things from today's passage that really pulled my heart in many, many directions. So I really hope and pray that God will do the same for you. If you just came to watch me speak or hear me speak, you are in the wrong church today. Okay, so with that, I don't want to scare you, but with that, let me just begin. So when we go through book of Genesis, we tend to focus on the main characters, don't we? We talk about Adam and Eve, and then we talk about Noah, and then we skip over to Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, Joseph, and then we move on to Exodus. But today, we'll be actually focusing on what we call supporting character. This person played a major role, significant role in God's story. And I think sometimes it's so easy for us to look over these characters in the Bible. So today, we'll kind of zoom in on this one character as Bible names him as senior servant. His name is not even mentioned, but if you read the Bible through our book of Genesis, you can kind of make a guess that this person is probably the person who was mentioned in chapter 15 by the name of Eliezer. He was actually supposed to be the designated heir to inherit everything that Abraham owned because Abraham wasn't sure whether he was going to have a child of his own. So imagine this servant who has so much trust from Abraham, and at one point, he was about to take over everything. And God shows up, says, you know what? You're not it. You're not it. Can you imagine from a human perspective how bitter you and I must be? Man, I had this opportunity to gain all this wealth, power, reputation, and I lost it all. It must have been a major letdown. But what we will see is that this person, most likely Eliezer, he continued to serve as a faithful servant despite all the disappointments, despite losing that opportunity, despite everything that happened afterwards. Instead of becoming jealous towards Isaac, who became the true heir, he continued to serve faithfully. And eventually we'll see today that he became the very connection of the generational blessing from Abraham and Isaac. How amazing is that? How amazing is that? Without Eliezer, Isaac and Rebekah would have never met. Genesis chapter 24 is more than a story of how Isaac met Rebekah. It could be a loving story that we read about, but it's more than that. It's more than a story of one servant's obedience to his master's dying wishes. And we'll look at today's passage in two major ways. One, first, as a story of the loyalty of a servant. Loyalty of a servant to his master in the most beautiful form. Second, we'll focus on the story of legacy as we witness how Abraham's values and faith are shared with the servant and also passed down to Isaac, his son. So with that thought, let's just dive right into the passage. I'll read it for us. It's a little long. Genesis chapter 24 is actually the longest chapter in the book of Genesis, but obviously we're not going to read all of it. I'll just read first 21 verses though, so let's follow along. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." The servant asked him, "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land?" Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from? Make sure you do not take my son back there, Abraham said. The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, to your offspring I will give this land, he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you'll be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore an oath to him concerning this matter. Then the servant left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels loaded with all kinds of good things from his master. He set out from Aram Naharaim and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time the women go out to draw water. Then he prayed, Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside the spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, please let down your jars that I may have a drink, and she says, drink, I'll water your camels too. Let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this, I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, please give me a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made this journey successful. So today, as I told you, we're going to focus on two main things. One, we'll look at the servant and focus on his loyalty. But before I get there, one thing that I was kind of observing from this text is verse 1. How it says, Abraham was now very old and the Lord had blessed him in every way. If you and I were in his position, everything worked out, he went through a good amount of struggles. Now he's very old and he has all this wealth and family built up. What would you do? I think immediate answer that I can come up with is, it's just settle. Why do more? Why risk anything else? I've done enough. Let's just retire and enjoy everything that I've done. But that wasn't the case, wasn't it? And I don't know how many of us here are sitting, I've done enough. I've suffered enough. And I can just enjoy the blessing of the Lord today. I hope that's not the attitude that we have when we come to God's work. Abraham did not settle. A lot of times when we're blessed, we tend to forget our calling. But you will see today that Abraham did not forget his calling. He did not forget why he was in this place called Promised Land. So with that, let's talk about the servant for a little bit. The loyal servant. The Bible today describes him as a senior servant, managing all that Abraham had. He was a trustworthy servant. Think about this. This person, like I told you, was with Abraham for a long time. That Abraham trusted him so much that he was willing to give all his belongings, his family line, to this person. That's how much Abraham trusted the servant. He has built up his reputation serving this family. He was reliable over the years, even before Isaac was born, even after Isaac was born. He stood by his master for at least 50 plus years through the most challenging times of waiting, leaving the home place with Abraham together perhaps, gone through all these struggles. Perhaps he watched Abraham go through a painful process of growing in his faith, including what just happened right before this. Do you know what happened right before this? That God told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. And this servant was probably right there, observing everything firsthand. And I believe that's what made this servant so loyal to Abraham. Because the question that I asked was, what made him become so loyal to this man? I believe he was influenced by observing Abraham's loyalty to God. Because what he observed from Abraham was his own loyalty to God, I think in turn, automatically, the servant mimicked, just followed after what his master did, serving his master faithfully with loyalty. And if I had time, I would go around the room and ask, is there someone in your life that you observed as someone who can be quote-unquote displayed loyalty? Maybe to your workplace, perhaps to some cause. You know, over the years, as I served in this church for almost 20 years now, as a young person, I was 23 when I first came to this church. But there were a lot of people who guided me over the years. Whether it's Pastor Neil, many of you may not know this person named Pastor Sarah. I mean, these two people were the most loyal people to this very church. They were not just here to do their job. Every time I talked to them, every time they told me things apart from ministry stuff, I could see without them saying they were very loyal to this church. And I've learned. So if people ask me, how were you able to last this long in this church? I have to credit the people that I had the chance to sit under. Pastor Neil, Pastor Sarah, people were so loyal to not only God, but to this very church and the calling that God placed for this particular church. And I believe before we get to this mission, we know the way the Bible works. I believe the servant came to this particular moment of this very important task, all because of his faithfulness. Would you give this important matter to anyone? If you have something so important that you want to tell someone to take care of, who would you turn to? Obviously, someone that you trust. And this servant was one of those people. All the little things over the years, he was able to deliver. He proved to his master that he is trustworthy and reliable. A lot of times, God gives us small tasks. Be faithful to those things. Do not look for big mission, because it will come in due time. All of us, we want to do big things for God. But what if God says, let me see you doing small things, one step at a time. When you're ready, I'll give you. This moment came for the servant. As Abraham was about to die, he knew. But there was one important mission that was left unfulfilled. So the servant was called with this mission. His mission was two things. First, he had to go find a wife among the relatives back at home. And Abraham made sure that you do not find a wife from where we are right now. You know, if I have time, we can talk about how you should not, as a Christian, date or marry non-Christian. Many reasons we can talk about. There are rare cases where through marriage that you can become Christian, that you can come to share same values. But oftentimes, it's not easy. But that's for another time, dating seminar. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 3, 4, God made it very clear, even after many, many years, He says, you shall not make marriages with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons, for they will turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. And we know throughout the Bible this happened again and again and again. This happened to people like Solomon. And Solomon wasn't a baby Christian. He was the most wise king, son of the most powerful king, David, and yet he chose to go against God's advice. He married lots of foreigners. They brought in foreign gods. Eventually, he fell away from the Lord. Second mission. Do not let Isaac go back to my hometown. You were to go find a wife. Remember we read, the servant said, what if this woman is not willing to come? Which is a pretty likely case, right? Why would someone just come because you went to go recruit someone to marry this person that you never met? Maybe in the older days that was more common, but he made sure, Abraham told the servant twice, make sure you do not take my son back there. And if the woman is unwilling to come back with you, you're released from this oath. So make sure you do not take my son back there. Why was that so important? Because to go back could only mean unbelief in God's promise. Remember, Abraham had a calling. He left his hometown for a reason. And just because he got settled in, just because he had all these blessings, didn't mean he can just give up on his calling. So he told him, do not take him back there. And this is a common theme from the Bible. When people are called to leave behind everything and follow God. And how often do we quickly turn back and continue to run back to the same place? When Elijah called Elisha to follow him, Elisha took his pair of oxen and he slaughtered them. And with the oxen's equipment, the cart that he used, whatever he used to farm, he used that to make fire and he cooked the meat and gave it to the people, saying, I'm going to just eliminate even a slight chance for me to turn back because I am called to follow God. There was no turning back. When disciples followed Jesus, they turned back to the ways of old and followed Jesus completely. How are you doing with that today? I think so many of us, including me, we're treading both sides, wanting to go back constantly, looking behind to see if there's something I can bring with me still. As we read along the passage, we see the servant really loved his master. We read the prayer. When you look into this prayer that he prayed for his master, he says, God, make me successful today, not because of my own success, so I can go back to my master and say, I did a good job. But the way he prays is, show kindness to my master. He loved his master so much that his even prayer was that God, you need to make me successful because this matters so much to my master. No wonder God answered that prayer right away. As soon as he prayed, he turned around, a beautiful woman comes, and everything just played out perfectly. Perhaps God was so pleased with the servant's selflessness and a generous heart for his master. You know how dedicated he was? We didn't get to read the rest of the chapter, but when you read through it, you see how much he loved his master. Because after he met the lady, he gets invited to go to their home. And this was how much the servant was dedicated to his master, because after traveling for many, many miles, some hundreds of miles through desert, he comes and the house person welcoming him says, get some rest. Let's eat. But this is what he says: I will not eat until I have told you what I have to say. Verse 33. So Laban says, then tell us. So he goes on to say, I am Abraham's servant. And then he explains why he's here. In verse 49, now if you will show kindness and faithfulness to my master, tell me. And if not, tell me, so I may know which way to turn. He refused to eat. He refused to rest and get comfortable until he shared his mission with Rebekah's family. He put his master's mission over his own comfort. Perhaps I'm like most of us, that I'm so quick to put my personal comfort before God's purpose and His will in my life. I'm so tempted to postpone and put God's mission on the back burner because I have things that I want to do right now. My wants and my needs become my first priority. My family, my kids, my future, my promotion. And when I have chance, God, then I will consider you. Do you see why my heart was really churning as I was meditating upon this passage? Not only that, you know how much he was dedicated? Even after all that, he finally ate, he went to sleep. It says in verse 54, the servant got up the very next morning and asked to be sent back to his master. He says, do not detain me now that the Lord has granted success to my journey. Send me on my way so I may go to my master. Do you see a servant who's so worried about his rest? Oh my gosh, it took me months to get here. Now that I've done my part, let me just rest, eat some good things. Let's go see some relatives, my old friends. No, he didn't do any of that. He knew that his master was eagerly waiting. He says, I'm going to go back the very next morning. So the servant completed his mission and he gave all. Gave all. He held nothing back. This was more than an assignment for him. He was an ambassador to his master. He took ownership of the mission. The servant was so persistent until he completed his mission when he came back home. And then we never see him mentioned ever again in the Bible. Let's take a moment to imagine how different things would be if we had more people like this servant in our churches, in our families, in our society, in our schools, in our communities, and in our workplaces, who's so mission focused. We had a mission Sunday last week, and I shared that it's not just one Sunday every day that we have a mission from the Lord. And the question that I will continue to ask the church is, are we living out our mission given by our Master? Or are we just so busy completing the mission that I set for myself? Have we put aside God's mission for a season? I believe it's time to dust it off. Revisit the mission that God had placed in you. And I hope today, as you hear this message, that something in you will stir up once again. The fire that God put in your heart will once again be ignited. A few weeks ago, I came across a Facebook post. God speaks to me a lot through Facebook, by the way. I came across a post by a church that I visited in Korea. And it was a post about this book. I think that church just went through a book study on this book called All In. And they put up this manifesto by this pastor. He's actually a pastor in this local area in DC, Mark Batterson, National Community Church, and they're doing wonderful things here in the DC area. But when I saw this post on Facebook, I saved it, I printed it, and I put it in my journal, and I also posted it on my office. You know why? Because this is what he wrote as a manifesto. First line went like this: quit living as if the purpose of life is to arrive safely at death. Quit living if the purpose of life is to arrive safely at death. Pursue God-ordained passions. Face your fears. Fight for your dreams. Take a stand. Dare to fail. Dare to dream. Dare to be different. Dare to go all out. And he writes in this book, the complete surrender of your life to the cause of Christ is not radical. It's actually very normal. It's time to quit living as if the purpose of life is to arrive safely at death. He writes, most people in most churches think they are following Jesus, but he says, I'm not so sure. They may think they are following Jesus, but the reality is this, that they have invited Jesus to follow them. They call him Savior, but they've never surrendered to him as Lord. Is Jesus Lord of your life? Is Jesus Lord of your decision making? Eliezer, this servant, gave his all. He went all in to his master's will with integrity and devotion. And he did all that even without Abraham being there with him. He could have just said, you know what? I went. I couldn't find anyone. This woman was not willing to come back with me because the distance was too far. But even without Abraham being present with him, the servant went all in. Because the servant made an oath. And he did everything in his power to keep that promise. What about us today? Are you giving your all to keep your promise that you made to God? That when you raise your hand and accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and said, I'll follow you, God. Wherever you lead me, whatever you say, I'm your servant. Are we really your servant? Or have we become the master of our lives? Second, I see the passing on of legacy in this wonderful story. I just love the fact that Abraham had a servant that he could trust and rely on to give a task that was so important, not only his immediate family, but for generations to come. And this is a story of legacy that is depicted through Abraham's deliberate choice to ensure that the covenant of God is passed on to his son. And he passed on, and he understood the importance of passing down a spiritual heritage. How did he go about sharing that legacy with the servant? And I told you before, I think throughout life, it wasn't that he sat his servant down and then list out, these are 10 things that you must do. I'm pretty sure he did, just like he told them here, to do not take my son over there. But for many, many years, through his life, Abraham showed what mattered to him. These are our family values. And I am loyal to God. And Abraham, the servant, make an oath to do the same thing, to keep the family values and principles. And right before he sent them out, Abraham actually said, you know what? I know you have some doubts, but in verse 7 he says, God will send this angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. He showed him the servant confidence in God, faith in God. And the servant in turn showed the same confidence in the Lord as he prayed for success in his journey. The prayer that he prayed was a daring prayer. Because think about this. Not only to find someone who would offer water, which was actually very common in that culture because they are a very hospitable culture back then. But it wasn't just to give water to him, but he said what? Someone who not only give water to me, but for all my camels. They say a camel may drink up to 20 gallons of water. Think about this. He had 10 camels, and I'm sure it wasn't just him, but they had many people who traveled with him. And for a lady, young lady, to come and offer something like that, yeah, maybe one person here and there, cup of water. And we're not even talking about opening a faucet to get water. Talking about dropping bucket, pulling it out of the well. Can you imagine someone doing that for hours? Going out of her way to show heart of generosity, to show that much hospitality. This prayer was a daring prayer. God, if I find someone like that, then she must be the one. Where do you think the servant got that much faith? I believe it's a result of observing Abraham and the prayers and the confidence that Abraham had in God. And the second question that I asked was, why didn't Abraham just send his son to go find his own wife? After all, Abraham wasn't like a young child. He was probably in his 40s by this time. Why did he have to send the servant to go find a wife for his son? Because Abraham knew that his young son would go back home and find comfort in his hometown, surrounded by his relatives, newfound love, and easily just settle there instead of wanting to come back and pursuing the promise and the calling that God had given, not only to his dad, but for the whole family. I believe Abraham knew the dream that God gave to him was bigger than one generation's promise. Did you hear that? The dream that God gave to Abraham was bigger than one generation's promise. Perhaps the dream that God has given you, the calling that God has given you and us, is so much bigger than just our lifetime. And it's our job to not only live our calling, but to pass it down. It was a legacy that was to be passed down through many, many generations. And Abraham understood his role to safeguard that dream and to pass down to his son no matter the cost. That's why he went out of his way to make sure the servant understood his instruction clearly. Do not take my son back to the hometown, because he has to live out this dream that even went beyond Isaac's life. And think about it. What was he willing to sacrifice? Talking about no matter the cost. Let's say the servant found this most beautiful woman who's so hospitable, the best wife candidate for his son Isaac. If she was willing to come, to leave her home and follow the servant to the promised land, Abraham said, you know what? As tempting as it might be to find that wife for my son, I'm willing to give that up. Why? Because my calling, the dream that God has given me, is so much important. And I'm willing to pay the price to sacrifice something that looks so good. Brothers and sisters, how are you passing down God-given dream or legacy to the next generation? I have the worship think about. Can I put this in today's context and share some of the thought process that I went through? Because I think, just like the servant observed Abraham for many, many years, I think our children and our next generation, they know what our values are. We don't have to sit them down and list out 10 things. These are the family values. Make sure that you keep them. No. They know what it is because they are observing your life carefully. The way you spend your money, the way you spend your time, the way you make decisions for yourself and for the family, the way you treat others. The decisions we make today will determine what legacy we leave behind. Think about that today. The decisions that you and I make today will determine what kind of legacy we leave behind. So let me ask today, when making your decisions about what school to go to, what church to attend, what jobs to take and reject, what kind of purchases you make, and where, choosing who to marry, how does your calling or God-given dream come into factor into that decision-making process? What if the opportunity for a nice future, job, a beautiful home, a wonderful person takes you away from the calling and away from your relationship with God? Are you willing to say no? I'm not saying every good opportunity or high-paying job or good home, these things are not evil. Plenty of amazing followers of Jesus Christ make lots of money. They own nice homes. There's nothing wrong with that. However, I'm simply asking us, your heart, to be more intentional about your everyday decision-making process. Because you and I know through the Bible, what makes us happy and what makes our lives more meaningful is not having more earthly things, not having good jobs and having good future retirement, but whether we're fulfilling the mission that God has called us to accomplish in our time on earth. Because that is the story of legacy we will leave behind. When we attend funerals, people don't talk about what a nice home you had, what a nice job you had. You know what they talk about? What kind of life you lived. What values that you showed in your life. So church, what legacy do you want to leave behind? If today was the last day of your life, what do you want people to think when they think about you? Let's all stand. You know, going all in, I'm not saying that we need to give all our money to God. And I said that many, many, many times, our church will be fine without your money. God doesn't need your money. You know what God needs? Is a heart. Fully devoted hearts. And I hope one day, as Bible talks about our lives, I hope it can be said like this way. And these two verses became my life verse as I entered my 30s about 13 years ago. Acts chapter 13 verse 22 says this: after removing Saul, he made David their king. God testified concerning him. This is God testifying concerning David. I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. Wouldn't you love God to say that about you? Not only that, God writes in verse 36 of chapter 13 of Acts, now when David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep. David fulfilled the mission that God had for his generation. That is my dream, that I can stand before him and hear him say, well done, Brian, well done. You faithfully served my purpose for your generation. So today as we sing this song, I want us to examine our hearts and sing these words and say, God, I give you my heart. I give you my life. When we sang earlier, I surrender all, I surrender all. Brothers and sisters, we sing these things all the time. But can I really ask you, do you mean it? Does your life show it? And if not, why? Why not? So let's take some time to respond to God's word and really examine our heart, our lives, whether we're living our lives as loyal servants, and what kind of legacy that God would like for all of us to leave behind. So let's take a moment to sing together.